I have a problem. Well, I have lots of problems, but this laptop is one of them. This laptop currently needs an operating system. It came new with Windows XP, and I could just install that on here and then I wouldn't have a problem. But here on this channel, I like making everything just that little bit more difficult than it needs to be. So, let's install Linux Mint. No, not that Linux Mint. This Linux Mint. Linux Mint 1.0 from a long time ago, also known as 2006. An operating system that I literally know nothing about except for one screenshot of it. I'm sure this couldn't possibly go bad at all. But why am I doing any of this? I don't know. Oh yeah, also the computer. It's a Toshiba Satellite 1405-S151. I'm not sure that I would actually say that it's terrible or whatever word I used in the title. That was mainly for the clickbait effect. But I'll leave that judgment up to you. It's an Intel Celeron 1200 MHz Tualatin 256 processor with 384 MB of PC133 SD RAM, a 30 GB 4200 RPM hard drive, a DVD-ROM CD writer combo drive, and a floppy drive, a 14-inch 1024x768 display, and probably the best of all, an ALI chipset with Trident Cyberblade XP integrated graphics. The hardware isn't actually really the worst thing about this computer, it's more that it's just beat up. The keyboard is like typing on mashed potatoes, the trackpad is a mirror, the battery smells like it's going to start on fire at any moment, and probably the most inconvenient of all, one of the display latches is completely snapped, so the screen barely stays open on this thing. But despite all that, it still works fine enough, and other than the old hard drive, it's actually a pretty quiet system. Anyway, on that note, we're going to be doing this over CD, unfortunately, because this computer doesn't support USB booting. Because it's old. This is the Linux Mint Live CD. Well, that's how you know it's legit, I guess. From what I can tell, the first version of Linux Mint was pretty much directly based on Kubuntu 6.06. But despite that, it doesn't appear to have a proper boot screen, though that still wasn't entirely uncommon back in the day. But fortunately, the GPU is compatible enough that it's able to load the X server, so cool. The K desktop environment. It definitely took its sweet time to load because this optical drive isn't really fast, but eventually got there, and fortunately it does have a full bootable live CD environment. First impressions, the theme is a bit different though than Kubuntu's, but fortunately everything seems to be picked up, everything important at least. Free physical memory, 3 MB. Oh boy. Maybe this thing is a bit too old for this. Just looking at some of the programs, there are some similarities, of course, with Kubuntu, but there are some differences in the things that come with it. So I guess we might as well actually install this, because, like I said, this optical drive is kind of slow. Welcome to the Linux Mint installer. This installer will help you install Linux Mint on your hard drive and configure a few things for you. Cool. Oh, it's a text box. Didn't realize you had to manually type all these things out. Well, there wasn't really a way to know if the hard drive was properly showing up. It did have some old partitions on it though, so I just kind of assumed the defaults, I guess. Wow, that's it. Okay. Didn't ask to create an account or anything, but alright. I suppose I should probably take this moment to clarify something about this, because this is Linux Mint 1.0, but it's not actually a proper release. I could only find a beta version of Linux Mint 1.0. Upon doing research after filming this part of the video, it turns out that there is no final release of Linux Mint 1.0. So, some things are going to be a little weird. But the nice thing about this relatively simple installer is that it actually really didn't take very long at all. Linux Mint is now installed on your computer. Remove the CD, reboot your computer, and have fun. Yeah, I'm sure I probably won't, but thank you anyway. So did it work? You betcha it did. What, do you think it wouldn't work? Just like the CD, it doesn't have a pretty boot screen, but it's not like you need that at all. Oh, okay. I don't know, seems good. That must be the chipset of the machine right there. It took its sweet old time to load, but eventually... we get a nice little sound to greet us. This is not the same as the Kubuntu startup noise, or whatever the KDE startup noise was from the time, but sounds pretty cool. Otherwise, here we are. This is actually fairly easy. Of course, it's basically the same looking as it was, except for there's no install icon on the desktop. First of all, I took a look at the taskbar, whatever it's called on Linux. There was the floppy drive that showed up right there, so it appears it's detected. But upon actually trying to use it with a floppy disk in it, it didn't do anything. There also appears to be the package manager. Oh, I forgot about this, but I was never asked to put in a password earlier. And yet it's asking for a password that I don't know. Turns out it just made an account called Ubuntu, so that must just be the default then in this beta installer. But I tried guessing it and quickly realized that the password is just Ubuntu. Maybe this was in some kind of documentation somewhere, but I didn't know that. I couldn't find it anywhere. I figured I'd modify that account since I don't see why it wouldn't work. And I'm probably going to forget that later. Anyways, with that non-issue now sorted out, we look at the package manager. That's right, this was before the days of having software centers and everything in your operating system. There's also apparently the control center for customization and stuff. You can set the Kubuntu wallpaper if you wanted. There's also Contact, and a really old version of Firefox. Considering it's 6.06, it was the same version that was on that other Toshiba laptop. Now, not long after that, I got a sound server fatal error. Something to do with a CPU overload. Followed up by another fatal error. And another one. And another one. I'm starting to think that something bad has happened. Indeed, I had attempted to play any sounds, but the whole sound was just not working anymore on the system. So I guess I'm going to try rebooting it to fix that. Dev HTA1 has gone 9,013 days without being checked. Right, because this thing has a dead CMOS battery, so when the install started it was at 2,000, and I changed the date afterwards. Nice. Okay. I thought I broke the operating system at first, but because the default account was set to Ubuntu, and it's trying to load that without a password, that account now doesn't exist because I changed it, and so now it's freaking out. I guess we can look at the logon screen at least. But there we go. Sound works. So I'm not sure what happened earlier. I was trying to see if I could find the power settings because I wanted to leave it on for a little while to see if that would happen again. And I didn't find the settings I was looking for, but I did find these settings for IBM ThinkPad and Sony Vaio laptops. Too bad this is neither of those, but that's kind of still neat that it's there. Anyway, I left it on for a while and it didn't happen again, so I don't know why that sound error happened at all. Anyway, this comes preloaded with quite a few things, mostly KDE applications, which I guess is a good thing because the package manager requires an internet connection. And without that, can't do a whole lot. We can look at the hard drive, which comes with this snapshot already on it, which is kind of bizarre. It does show what this bottom bar is supposed to be. Apparently some kind of news display thing, presumably because it doesn't have an internet connection or because it's from 20-something years ago, it doesn't work anymore. At the very least, it doesn't take up a lot of space, just under 2 gigabytes. Not bad. Also, weirdly, the CD drive doesn't show up until there's a disk in the drive, which I apparently also can't access. So neither the floppy drive nor the CD drive work. Otherwise, without an internet connection, there isn't really a whole lot to do on this system. You can do basic stuff. It comes preloaded with a word processor, part of the K-Office suite, which is handy. But outside of that, not much to do without an internet connection, so let's fix that. Thankfully, this computer's Ethernet chipset works just fine, which is always good. You never know with Linux. Sometimes stupid stuff like that happens. Of course, that being said, not a whole lot to do with Firefox 1.5.0.3, but you can do Google searches. Obviously, this would have been fine enough back when this was new, but these days it doesn't really work anymore. And even despite having an internet connection, the package manager still doesn't work. It still can't establish a connection with anything. However, this is just Ubuntu, pretty much. In fact, looking at its sources file, all the repositories are just Ubuntu. So, by running a command that redirects all the repositories to oldreleases.ubuntu.com, now it does establish a connection. It's really great how that works. This doesn't, of course, add new updates, but it at least adds all the updates from back in the day to get this updated to about 2007 or so. Of course, this took a really long time, and then I did a reboot just to be safe. I really like these startup and shutdown sounds on this. I don't know, they're just kind of something different. Anyway, of course, because it's Kubuntu 6.06, even after updates, the old web browser can't really do a whole lot. Now earlier when I booted the live CD, I had noted that the RAM usage was not particularly good, and it still wasn't great. There were occasionally times where the system was struggling pretty bad. It was at this point, for a little bit of fun comparison, that I decided to swap out the hard drive for a just as old and terrible drive and install Windows XP on this computer. This, of course, took its sweet time, because why wouldn't it? Your current security settings do not allow this file to be downloaded? I don't know what happened, but this install just got severely screwed up, and I haven't even done anything. There's like no permissions to do anything. Literally out of the box, and it's already broken. This obviously isn't really a completely fair comparison. This is a much older operating system, and it also doesn't have 1,000 million different programs and things running in the background. But I was kind of curious anyway. I thought maybe I would try seeing if I could install some of the programs that came on the disk, because old Kubuntu from back in the day came with a couple of old applications that you could just install right from the disk. It's kind of a little bit of fun. But it turns out that the executables for these got removed from the disk, probably to save space. So the shortcuts just don't actually do anything. They just forgot to remove this old executable off the disk. So, oh well. Anyways, obviously the RAM usage was better, but I am obliged to point out that when this computer does have a big software load on it, like the one from when it was new, and after it's received all the updates and everything, it's not pretty. And even still, opening things has the same CPU spikes that Linux Mint had. This is just kind of not really a great CPU, but it's what it has. It's a Celeron for you. I also decided to time the boot using this high-tech new phone that I found. We'll see what's faster, the computer booting up or the amount of time it takes for this phone to open a stopwatch app. It actually didn't do too bad, just under 1 minute to boot up from post to the desktop, and for the hard drive to stop being annoying. Linux Mint, of course, took longer, accounting for about a 15-second delay for me to put in the password. It took about 1 minute and 45 seconds. This isn't really entirely surprising. KDE from back in the day also just took more resources than Ubuntu, for example. So I think that's pretty much about it for this. I've kind of about had my fun with what I wanted to try on here. So There was one last thing I wanted to do since I was already doing comparisons with XP, and that was to try Linux Mint 2.0, the first proper version of Linux Mint, from what I can gather. Unlike 1.0, Linux Mint 2.0 appears to be based on Ubuntu rather than Kubuntu, so GNOME instead of KDE. Also, because it's slightly newer, it's Ubuntu 6.10 rather than 6.06. While it was booting up, I noticed something. Listen to the optical drive. It doesn't sound like something is going right. I ran the built-in CD defect checker on the Ubuntu disk and oh boy, we got some issues. Turns out this disk has some grooves in it, which is nice. That's probably why it's not reading. Sure enough, I checked it on my Workbench PC that I just burned it on, and it didn't read, with a pretty similar issue. And that would explain why it wasn't working. At least I don't have to get mad now at another one of my optical drives dying, I guess. I burned another CD. This disc better fucking work, because this is the last one I have. And fortunately, it did. Bluebuntu. Wow, this really is just Ubuntu with a different wallpaper and theme. Okay. And also with a lot less things on it. Presumably to try and slim down the operating system. It also comes with Real Player. You know, like the software that came pre-installed with like every OEM machine of the 2000s? Yeah, that Real Player. Anyway, it's pretty much just lighter weight Ubuntu. At the very least, it means that this one has an actual proper installer and not whatever the hell this was. Just kidding, it crashed halfway through the setup for some reason. I couldn't click on anything. Thankfully, just like 1.0, this one didn't take very long to install either. Like 15 minutes or so. Now, as I said earlier, KDE usually takes more resources than GNOME from this time, and that's pretty clear by looking at the memory, which is way better on this system. Though it can't save this terrible old hard drive taking forever to load anything. I figured I'd do the same treatment. I'll go ahead and run all the old updates on it. By running that command, it reports the new distribution release 7.04 is available. Because yeah, there are lots of things that need to be updated. The Ethernet on this also kind of sucks. It's pretty slow. This hard drive sounds like it's about to die at any moment. And then I did the same thing, doing a boot up test. I also had to put in a password on this one, so it also took a couple seconds delay, about just under 10 seconds. It was still slower than XP, but faster than 1.0 by almost 30 seconds. So, yeah, it's cool, I guess. It's probably a much better fit for this system resource-wise, but I don't know, maybe just because it had a bit more character, or because I'm a KDE shill, I think I'm going to leave 1.0 on this system. Obviously, there are still issues with it. It's far from a perfect experience, but I still think it's pretty neat. I'm definitely going to need to spend some time with this, customizing it a bit more and just testing out stuff on it, seeing kind of what programs I can still download to this, and stuff like that. But this video is already so long as is that I think I'm going to probably save that for another day.